Tucson. And let me begin by saying that we have done rallies all over this country, and we've had great people, trade unionists, environmentalists, women's advocates, introducing us, but I have never heard people, young people, give the kinds of introductions and statements that I heard tonight in Tucson. And what it tells me, and Raul made this point, what it tells me is that when we stand together as white and black and Latino and Native American and Asian American, when we stand together, there is nothing that can stop us from transforming this country. And let me just start off by thanking Congressman Raul Grijalva, not only for his friendship for so many years, not only for his co-chairmanship of the Progressive Caucus, but for his decades of fighting for civil rights for all and Latino rights. You have here in Tucson one of the great members of the United States Congress. And let me also thank Isabel Garcia for all that she has done. Naylin Pike.
It's the big one.
Who reminds us of how much we owe to the first Americans, and that we will protect them. And let me thank that young man, Bob De La Rosa. And let me thank those two young ladies, Maria Isabel and Maria Teresa Aguino, for that wonderful rendition of the national anthem. Frankly, it is hard to follow in the footsteps of these young people, beautiful young people. Make us all so proud. Now, I am often asked by the media why it is that we attract turnouts like this. Why so many people in Tucson are out tonight. Why 24,000 people were out in Boston last week. Why 28,000 people a couple of months ago were out in Portland, Oregon. The media was asking, why is this happening? Why is it happening that we are raising money without a super PAC? We were all told, all of the political experts said that the only way you can compete is by begging millionaires and billionaires and super PACs for money. We said no. And our campaign has received 650,000 individual contributions. And the average contribution, and this warms my heart, the average contribution is not $2,000, it's not $50,000, it is $30 a person. How's that? This is a people's campaign, not a billionaire's campaign. And when the media asks, how is all of this happening? Who is going to respond to the call for a political revolution? It turns out that the people in Tucson and people all over this country are prepared to stand up, as Raul said, and make sure that our government belongs to all of us and not just a handful of billionaires. The truth is that the American people are sick and tired of establishment politics. They are sick and tired of establishment economics. The people of this country understand that almost all of the new wealth and income being created is going to the top 1%. And the American people are saying loud and clear, we want an economy that works for workers, not just the very rich. And the American people understand that as a result of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, you know about Citizens United, that as a result of that decision, our campaign finance system, our political system is totally corrupt and American democracy is being undermined. Before I get into the thrust of my remarks, I wanted to take a brief moment to tell you what I expect most of you already know, and that is that today, on 2 campuses in our country, one at Texas Southern University, a student was shot and killed, and one other was wounded. And as you know, in your own state, at Northern Arizona State University in Flagstaff, one student was killed and 3 were wounded. Now, it goes without saying that our condolences go to the families of those who were killed, and our hearts and prayers go out for a full recovery for those that were wounded. But we also know that we are tired of condolences and we are tired of just prayers. We are tired and we are embarrassed in picking up the paper or turning on the TV and seeing children in elementary schools slaughtered and young people on college campuses shot. And the truth of the matter is, I wish I could tell you otherwise, the issue of gun violence is not going to be solved easily. But just because it is not going to be solved easily does not mean that we do not address it and do the best we can. Now, I come from a state of Vermont, thank you, and I invite you all up, especially in the summer, and we'll come here in the winter. How's that? I come from a state which has a history going back to its very creation of people owning guns and hunting and doing target practice. But the truth, and having virtually no gun control at all today. But what the people of Vermont understand is that we need to have a serious conversation and stop the yelling and demeaning of all people involved in this issue. Overwhelmingly, the American people understand that it is crazy that people who should not own guns do own guns. They understand overwhelmingly that not only do we need to strengthen the instant background check, we need to broaden it as well. And they understand that it makes no sense that we have a loophole in the law so that people can go to gun shows and buy weapons without having to go through the instant background check. People understand that's wrong, and that has got to change. And there are many people in this country who do not understand why we are selling and distributing, allowing to be distributed, assault weapons which have only one function, and that is the killing of people. And people do not understand why we do not have legislation to prevent people from buying guns legally, but then selling it to criminals, the so-called straw man situation. And also what people don't understand is that in my state and all over this country, there are people who are experiencing severe emotional problems. All over this country, we have thousands of people who are suicidal, who are homicidal, but they cannot get the help they need when they need it. We need a revolution in mental health delivery in this country. Somehow, if you are involved in an automobile accident and you're hurt, you get rushed to an emergency room and you get good care. People save your lives. But if you are suffering a mental breakdown and you are suicidal or you're a homicidal, you may not be able to find the care you need because there aren't doctors or counselors available, or you cannot afford that care. That's wrong. So I think while, yes, there are disagreements of how we go forward in terms of gun safety, I think the vast majority of the American people want us to move forward in sensible ways which keeps guns out of the hands of people who should not have that and cuts down on these senseless murders that we see every week. And let me also say a word on an issue that I know is obviously of enormous consequence all over this country, but maybe more in Arizona than in many other areas. And that is the issue of immigration reform. And let me begin by saying I know a little bit about immigration, because my father came to this country at the age of 17 from Poland. He came to this country not speaking a word of English, came to this country without a nickel in his pocket, and he never made a whole lot of money. I grew up in a 3.5 room rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, New York. And my mother's dream was that someday, maybe our family would own its own home and not have to rent. That never happened. She died young, and her dream never came to pass. But my parents, both of them, were enormously proud, my father maybe especially, to see his two sons go to college, and he enjoyed the opportunities that America gave him, and there was no prouder American than that young man who came to this country at the age of 17. Now, my family's story is a story very similar to many people who are here tonight. And that story is the story of America. It is the story of hardworking families coming into this country to create a brighter future for their children. It is a story rooted in family and fueled by hope. It is a story that continues to this day in families all across our country. Today, as everyone here knows, we have 11 million people in this country who are undocumented, who came to this country to improve their lives, to escape oppression, fleeing desperate poverty and violence. Let's be frank. Today's undocumented workers play an extraordinarily important role in our economy. Without these workers, it is likely that our agricultural system would collapse. Undocumented workers are doing the hardest work in this country. They are harvesting our crops, building our homes, cooking our meals, caring for our kids. They are part of the fabric of this country. 11 million people came to this country so they could feed their families, escape gang violence, and desperate economic circumstances. Let me also be very clear that people came to this country because they knew that there were jobs, and if anyone thinks that employers throughout America didn't know that the workers they were hiring were undocumented, they would be dead wrong. That is the reality of where we are. Employers were complicit, hiring undocumented workers for low wages. That's the fact. Slave wages, all right. And let me tell you a little story, if I might. Back in 2007, as the senator from Vermont, I went to a place called Immokalee, Florida. Anybody know where Immokalee, Florida is? What is unique about Immokalee, Florida, a small town near Naples, that's where they grow most of the tomatoes, low-grade tomatoes used by McDonald's and Burger King. I went there. On the day that I visited, just coincidentally, the U.S. attorney was bringing charges against a contractor for slavery. In 2007, people were being held involuntarily to work in the fields. And I saw the working conditions and the exploitation that these workers experienced. And I saw the horrendous housing that they lived in. And I'm happy to tell you that we had a hearing on this issue in Washington. We made some progress. Wages went up. Working conditions went up. But the truth is, there are many Immokalees all over this country where undocumented workers are being exploited. And And when you exploit people who cannot defend themselves, when you exploit people by paying them low wages, what you are doing is creating a race to the bottom for every worker in America. And let me tell you something else. People can have disagreements about immigration reform, but in the year 2015, it is not acceptable to be stooping to racism and demagoguery in order to win some political votes. It is not acceptable. It is not American to be defining a whole group of people who happen to come from Mexico and calling them criminals and rapists. We have fought too hard in this country for hundreds of years to end racism, to end discrimination, to revert in 2015 to that kind of ugly language. Now, in 2013, I proudly supported comprehensive immigration reform legislation that passed the U.S. Senate. Now, this is not, and I do not want to suggest for a moment that this is a perfect piece of legislation. Far from it. I believe that there must be, and this legislation begins that process, legal protection for the undocumented people in this country, comprehensive immigration reform, and a path toward citizenship. The Senate bill contained the provisions of the DREAM Act, which I strongly support, and which would offer the opportunity of permanent residency and eventual citizenship to young people who are brought to the United States as children. It is my belief that we should recognize the young men and women who comprise the Dreamers for what they are, American kids who deserve the right to legally be in the country which is their home. The Senate bill was far from perfect, but at least it began the process of moving us in the right direction. It is beyond my comprehension that the House of Representatives has not yet even begun the discussion on immigration. Instead of reverting to racism, maybe they want to deal with this issue in a serious way. Until we can pass comprehensive immigration reform, we must be as aggressive as we can in pursuing policies that are humane and sensible and that keep families together. And this includes taking measures that are currently available, including using the presidential power of executive orders when appropriate. While the Senate passed the DREAM Act in its immigration bill, and while the House has not yet acted, I think President Obama did exactly the right thing through his executive order for deferred action for childhood arrivals. DACA, as it is called, was a good first step, but should be expanded. Deferred action should be expanded to include the parents of citizens, parents of legal permanent residents, and the parents of dreamers. Our job is to bring families together, not tear them apart. And when we talk about issues facing this country beyond gun violence, beyond immigration, we are talking about the fact that in the United States today, we have more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth, and it is worse today in America than at any time since 1928. Let me be very clear. There is something profoundly wrong in this country when the top 1/10 of 1% own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That is not what America is supposed to be about. There is something profoundly wrong when in Arizona and Vermont and all over this country, people are working 2 or 3 jobs. People are working incredible hours in order to put food on the table, and yet 58% of all new income is going to the top 1%. That's wrong. There is something wrong in this country when in recent years we have seen a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, and yet we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. That's wrong. There is something wrong when in the last 2 years, the 14 wealthy